Welcome back to another episode of UbeMatcha Podcast. Last time we answered 5 questions about us, and we have 5 more questions to cover this week. So, should we get started on the questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first question is, which cultural holidays from our respective backgrounds, Japanese, half Korean, and near Filipino, should be more widely celebrated in the US?
Ooh.
Actually, I don't even know what holidays are in Philippines that's unique to Philippines.
There's a lot of Catholic holidays because the Philippines is a very Catholic country that's adopted a lot of Catholic celebrations. I think there's just a big party culture in the Philippines. I don't know if, as in everyone has a ton of birthday parties, or birthday parties are when everyone gets together, and because families are so big, there's like a ton of birthday parties, I feel like. It's like a never-ending stream of birthday parties in the Philippines.
So it's not like a single day that's defined as a national thing, but it's more like just whenever things happen is how you would just celebrate.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know if there are really any specific Filipino holidays, at least because I wasn't born and I grew up in the Philippines. I feel like I didn't celebrate like Philippine Independence Day or things like that. So I feel like a lot of the holidays I did celebrate were more religious ones. Like, for example, on Christmas, we would celebrate Noche Buena, which is after Christmas Mass. So going to church in Catholicism is called going to Mass. So after Mass, we would go back home and then eat like traditional Filipino desserts and food. And because my mom is very religious, that was like a big thing to her to do after Christmas Mass. So I just remember doing that. I feel like other holidays were pretty typical, but celebrated in a Filipino style, like New Year's, birthdays. They would just, have a lot of decorations. We would have cake, but more Filipino food like lumpia and pancit. We always have noodles on our birthday. It's a kind of a superstition, so we can have like long life. So I think what's interesting about Filipino culture is kind of the mix of religion, like Christian traditions, but also maybe more tribal traditions that the Philippines had before colonization.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So instead of having a day of celebration that's like maybe, let's say, like Independence Day being widespread, you already have a way of celebrating that's already Filipino, whether it's like American tradition or Philippine tradition. So you're thinking there really isn't a day that's worth like bringing on to the U.S. culture to celebrate.
I feel like days are already shared, or a lot of celebration days are already shared, and any that are not, I think, are definitely more cultural to the Philippines. I don't know if just everyone would adopt it in the U.S. if they weren't Filipino or Asian, at least. It just might be a little bit more foreign to them. So that's just what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I think off tangent, until I think I met you and got to know more about Filipino culture, I didn't associate like Catholicism with the Filipino culture. And maybe that's something if you study those things or are into the history, you probably already know like, oh yeah, of course, like this historical influence from colonization brought these things in. But I wasn't aware of those things, and I'm not usually that type of person who dive into the history. So that's something I learned, and a lot of celebrations, even like the holiday in December it's like, oh, it's like a little different than what I'm used to and how it's being celebrated in Japan.
Like Christmas
and
Christmas. Everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I would go to KFC just like any other Japanese people would try to celebrate. For some reason, KFC is a thing in Japan, but here, like, we eat like a long noodles. Wait, maybe that was more for the New Year. The long noodles for the, like, a longer life.
Oh, yeah. I feel like other Asian cultures have a variation of that on different holidays and different special occasions.
Yeah. So, yeah, like, I was introduced to different cultural celebration at your house. And I don't even know if that's how Filipinos would typically celebrate or if it's just, like, your own home's adaptation, because every family has, like, something a little bit different. Or it's something they make it up. How do you know if the way your family celebrate it is close to how it's been done in the Philippines, or it's more like a mix of Americanized / Filipino / different things mixed in?
It's more Filipino, I would say. I feel like my family's friends like lived in different parts of Washington. We would go to their house. So we mainly celebrated with a lot of other Filipinos, but there were also other kinds of people there too, but it was mainly Filipino. So I feel like it was just taking like a Filipino holiday and then celebrating it in America, because we would eat pretty like typical Filipino food. I mean, we would randomly have pasta sometimes, or like something from Costco, you know, but that's because we're in America. And I feel like if you were celebrating in Hong Kong, for example, like Noche Buena, then you might even have some Hong Kong food sometimes at parties, just because you're in that country or place. So I think you do adapt a little bit to where you are, but still want to be connected to your community or the people that you know in that other country.
That makes sense.
From, even though it's different from where you came from.
Yeah. I think when I think about Japanese holidays in US, I think there is already some adaptation of like a New Year's way to celebrate, like eating the mochi, like a pounding the mochi. I think those are the things that are where foreigners kind of learn about, and I think it's cool, and usually it's a big demonstration. And I think during the summer, sometimes you see like a taiko drumming with like, summer festival. Festival is usually the type of, maybe it's not a one holy day, but it's more like a seasonal celebrations that gets widespread. But I think when it comes to things like the Shichigo-san or like a Hatsumode, those are very specific to like a Japanese customs that's coming from maybe more religious background, like going to the temple on the New Year's to pray for the
is that Hatsumode?
Yeah, Hatsumode. And you would also go to try to see the Hatsuhinode, which is the first rise of the sun.
Yeah.
And or like a Shichigo-san, that's when you turn into 3 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old.
Yeah.
Those are more like, it matters where you are, where you have to be at the temple or you have to wear the kimono.
Yeah.
For the children, that may be cool, but it's kind of hard to widespread in US because you don't have the same things.
Because that goes back to religion too, I feel like, right? And if everyone's adopted that religion, then maybe it makes sense. But even then, like, there are religious practices in the Philippines that are practiced in Catholicism that are different from Catholicism in the US. So I don't know if they would just necessarily adopt the same things. But in the US, when I went to Catholic church, later on, as I got older, we started having Catholic Mass. So we would have Catholic Mass, but then we would have a Filipino version of it at the church, even though the church wasn't Filipino.
Oh, that's
like weird. They would do, I don't remember the name of it. But it's a Filipino Mass. There's a specific name for it. But then we would sing like Filipino songs, but it would be for all the church, not just Filipinos.
Is a separate mass service for Filipinos, or is it like all the American people who go there?
No, American people too. Like it was in the evening time they had it. They started doing it later though. They didn't do it when I was a kid, but then I think because the church, more and more Filipinos started going, I think their community wanted to incorporate more aspects of the community in the church because there was so many of them. And then after the church service, there would be like a potluck, like a Filipino potluck. I think my mom bought adobo once. So
that sounds like a really good thing to carry.
So yeah,
spread wider.
There was some adoption of, I guess, Filipino culture in a religious way, which I think is kind of interesting now thinking about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. But it makes sense.
It's called simbang gabi.
Simbang gabi.
Simbang gabi. So simbang is like to go to church. It's a variation of like to go to church. And then gabi is night. So it's like going to church at night, but you only do that in the Philippines like Christmas time. So they adopted that at the Catholic church that I went to, which had a lot of other races that went there, not just Filipinos. So that was a kind of a cool adaptation.
That's really cool. So as the members of the church start to have larger maybe portion of Filipinos, Catholics coming in, they want a representation of themselves in the church.
And I think there's just more multiculturalism is like a big value that a lot of organizations have now. So I think they're trying to introduce more people to that, which I think...
It was at the church in Kirkland, Washington? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Washington is very interesting melting pot of different cultures.
Yeah.
And when I walk in the street, like sometimes I see more Asians. Sometimes
more Asians now than compared to before.
Yeah, compared to before. And the transformation or our experience shifting was very interesting coming into the Austin, where we see less Asians, something we mentioned last time, and maybe representation of our culture is a little bit different here. So maybe in the conclusion, I'd like to see more of maybe Filipinos, Japanese, Korean cultural festival adaptations seeing more in Austin. That would be more cool. Or maybe it doesn't have to be like widespread in the US as a whole. Right? We like to see some regions.
But I guess that's true. There are little pockets of culture celebrating their unique holidays or customs, and it's open to everyone that's there. I know the Japanese American community in Austin does festivals too. So I feel like there is, it might be as a smaller scale compared to Seattle, but I feel like it does happen in different states and places in the US. Yeah.
And when it comes to Korean cultural celebration, I don't think I really know much because I was in Korea for just 1 year when I was like 5 to 6. So I don't even remember if we did anything. And also my parents are Christians too. Yeah. So I don't know if we even did anything traditional with mix of potentially other religions influencing those cultural.
You didn't do any Shinto or Buddhist
I don't think celebrations. So. Even in Japan, we didn't really do it. So I don't know if we even did any of that in Korea. Maybe other than, I think I have a photo of my childhood wearing like traditional Korean clothes.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
So that's probably some kind of celebration of something. But other than that, I don't think I remember anything. Maybe I should ask my mom next time.
Yeah, I think we actually have a picture of you in that traditional Korean outfit.
Yeah. Cool. So that's the holiday. Let's move on to the next question. How did our childhoods in different cultures shape our attitude towards work and leisure? Maybe I can start on this one. Yeah. Obviously, Japanese culture, much more work. At least, especially for men.
Compared to leisure,
right? Some of them work like 6 days a week, and occasionally some of them have to work 7 days a week. And leisure is much less of a component in their life.
And they have to, after work, still go out and drink with coworkers right until 2 a.m. That's not an exaggeration. I think they actually do that normally.
Yeah, and I know it's changing because the the new generations, right? Like younger generations are like, why do I do that? I don't care.
Yeah.
And apparently people would even quit company now.
Yeah,
because of all the things that they don't want to do. And it's a surprise to the older generation because you couldn't quit working for a company.
Yeah,
like,
you stay with the same one forever.
Yeah. So now I know it's changing, but the portion of the time you spend in work is much more. And at night, maybe have like a little bit of leisure. And you can see maybe reality of, or representation of some reality of it in YouTube videos like a Paolo. He interviews people.
Paolo in Tokyo.
Tokyo, yeah. He goes out and interviews Japanese people and follow their life from the morning to the night.
Yeah.
And I find that very interesting because currently I don't live in Japan, even though I lived in Japan before. So I don't get to see the real life aspect of what is their day look like. And possibly Paolo might be picking people who are maybe a little bit more in the, what I call it, like a little bit privileged, or maybe not privileged, but having a little bit of a less stressful life. Compared to, I know some people, their life is like much more, I guess that's not true, because when he features people working in restaurants or doing crafts, they work like 6 days a week, 7 days a week. So
well, maybe more in the creative or non-traditional lifestyle, maybe.
Yeah. So I would say that may have influenced me because I tend to work a lot and I actually enjoy working.
Yeah.
And the leisure part is something that I like to. I think work sometimes become a leisure for me.
Or you
as a
end up making work something leisurely.
Yeah, because as a software engineer, I like to create things.
Yeah.
And that skill gets used for my work.
Yeah.
And the skill gets used to build something cool that I like to build. So for me, maybe the blend of it helps me feel like I'm not working all the time. Of course, it sometimes helps when you want to go out and then, like, oh, I guess I have to go. But then it ends up being a way to have a leisure time, to take a break.
Yeah.
And possibly that's how a lot of typical Japanese husbands go through anyway, where the wives or the kids, it's going to make you go out and like, oh, okay, I guess I have to wake up early on Saturday morning, even though I'm so tired from the week of work, but I have to get up and I have to do all these things. But you end up having fun anyway.
Yeah.
So that might be how it shaped my cultural view. Again, I didn't live in Korea too long, so I don't know if that ever even affected me. But,
like Korea's work culture.
Yeah. And I know sometimes it can even be crazy there, depending on your occupation. But what do you think? Because you grew up here, but you still have Filipino parents and you've seen them work. And do you think that have affected your work balance, life balance in any way?
I think, there's a lot of different ways that it has affected my life. I think one thing is my parents were definitely not well-to-do. I didn't come from a well-to-do family. My family, both of my family backgrounds, my mom and dad are working class. So they worked at a hospital, or they still work at a hospital. And my mom used to be on call and she would have to work nights. Or she would work, at night. And then my dad had an opposite schedule. So I could be watched. And I think life was really hard for them in the beginning. They didn't have a lot of money, or at least at the beginning of my life. It wasn't super easy. Like, we weren't poor, but we didn't have a lot of money either. So I think for me, I always saw like working is important. And I think you're not always going to be doing work that is super fun, and work isn't always fun, but it's important because you learn skills, you learn how to organize, you also learn how to just be creative and problem solve. So yeah, it kind of made me think too, all the work they did. And these are probably stories for another time about my parents' occupation. Because my mom, she is a nurse, but that's not what she always wanted to do. It kind of made me think about the kind of work that I wanted to do, having more of the opportunity to choose what I wanted to do and not feel like I was forced or I had to do something out of obligation for other people. So, yeah, I feel like if we're talking about work culture, I think the US, depending on like where you work, because I think if you work in tech, then I feel like you get compensated pretty well, which is good for the work that you do. And then I feel like compared to if you work at a hospital or if you do more work that involves physical labor, I think like the pay is really good. So I feel like it is a privilege to work in tech because it's not, I feel like personally, and maybe this is a hot take, that it's not as hard as doing more of the physical laborious jobs. So I feel like I definitely am thankful that I can choose the job that I want to do. And I can be more flexible because I own my own business or I freelance, things like that. So I do think about how grateful I am in that sense. But yeah, I think in the US, it's also hard because you really do have to work to live too. It's not cheap to live here. Things are expensive versus in the Philippines, you can live a pretty decent life even if you don't make a lot of money. And this is another topic for another time, but in general, and this is another hot take, I feel like people are generally more happier in the Philippines than they are in the US. I see a lot of disgruntled people here. Not everyone's disgruntled, but in general, grumbling about things that I feel like if you lived in a more developing country or a country where it's not as easy, it's not infrastructure, the weather is kind of crazy, I think you appreciate the more simple things more. So
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think in the more, I don't know what's the developed society where we think about how do we not get screwed up? How do we keep what we earned? How do we protect our future and invest? Whereas, and that can be stressful, whereas maybe in some other countries like Philippines, you think more like, how do I live a good life with my family and friends around me in the neighborhood? More so than maybe worrying about like being protected.
Like, oh, you're right. Or you feel like you don't need a lot to live a good life, which is true in a sense. And it's not to say that the Philippines is better than the US or whatnot, because this is definitely a very nuanced topic, but I think there are definitely good things about the work culture and like the thinking around that in the US versus the Philippines and then the Philippines versus the US. And this is also based on me growing up and what I observed and now working myself. Yeah.
What's your ideal ratio of maybe work to leisure in the spectrum of like a typical, like a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday work, and then reserve the afternoon or weekend for leisure? Or would you like to have more leisure? So like ideally you work just like 4 days a week, 3 days a week, and more leisure time. Or do you feel like you're more driven and like you want to work more if possible?
It's tricky because I feel like work, especially now because I do social media marketing, it leaks into my personal life. And I actually have to put barriers around my personal life because then they just become one thing and that's mentally not healthy for you. So I would like to separate those more, but I think I'm also the kind of person that, and this can be considered a toxic or not toxic trait, that I feel like I have to keep producing things. It's really hard for me to just have hobbies where I just do things for fun because I inevitably think about, okay, like, so how can I get more people to see this, or how do I monetize this? And that's not the healthiest thing, but I also feel like because I do my own thing for work, sometimes it's really hard to justify not working if what I'm working on won't produce something like money or influence or, get me something, which is not the healthiest way to think about it either.
I think we like to see the results from our creation, because I think that's part of fun, where people notice my work, and that might come from the purchases or the views or follows, right? And I don't think it's a like unhealthy thing, and I think it's like sometimes a good driver or motivation for that. I think similar thing happens to me, where as a software engineer, it's so easy to just pull up my laptop and work anywhere. That I can easily seep into, like, after we eat dinner, like, well, I guess I can get back to work and work on my laptop. Whether it's from a full-time job or like my personal creation.
It's just easy to jump back and start working.
Yeah,
I was thinking about this recently too, when I had a phone call with a friend. I was catching up with them, and I was talking about the road trip that we had when we drove from Seattle to Austin, that 3,000 miles, I think. And I was working in the car when you were driving for a lot of it. So we bought like this charger that, I don't know what you call it. It's like
a huge power bank.
A huge power bank where you can charge your laptop. So I was able to work. And I was, for the most part, able to work, except for, and I was telling my friend, when we got to pockets of travel where we were driving through the desert or like more deserted areas that didn't have signal. So it was actually the Wi-Fi signal that stopped me from working sometimes. And so I wouldn't be able to work. And then I would just have to unplug or be forced to unplug and just look out the window and enjoy the scenery. And that was actually good, though, because I feel like we're probably never going to have a road trip like that again. To enjoy it in the moment and just be present, I think, is really important. I think life is like, there's ebbs and flows, but it's good to just, enjoy the moment when you're in it too.
Yeah, I agree. I think some forcing factor in our lives helps. And whether it's the work thing disconnected because of the situation, like the Wi-Fi, or it's the spouse wanting to do something and you're like, okay, I guess I have to do it, but then you end up enjoying it. Or if you have kids, that could be another forcing factor. Maybe it's a good thing in our life to be distracted from what we want to do in front of us, but maybe not the most healthiest thing to always get focused on that. Well, next question. Has living in a multicultural household made us more adept at navigating social situation in a diverse city like Austin? It's a very interesting question, because we probably came from more diverse culture in Seattle, maybe slightly less culture in Austin. And we did notice a little bit of difference in maybe like adapting, not from monoculture to the multiculture, but maybe more multiculture to a little bit less multiculture.
Is the question asking, though, as us being a multicultural couple, did that help us more in Austin?
Yeah. I think maybe the cultural aspect or the difference that I notice is in Seattle, we work more, as we mentioned last time, and social interactions are more like a work interactions, or talking about like the house, like how to afford a house, or like how to get this or that, like thinking about like life planning stuff, and maybe less of a natural just hang out, like forget about our life, just hang out. And you needed more reasons, or you needed a push to get to the hanging out with friends or coworkers. Whereas I think in Austin, there's more like a random social interactions that happen, where when we went to a Blue Dot furniture store, this one person working there were just casually inviting us for dinner or drink. And that, I feel like, was a little bit new. And I don't think living in Seattle or living in Japan for me has helped adapt to say yes in the moment, because I come from the background of like, oh, strangers talking to me, like like, let's not talk to each other unless there's like a reason, right?
Yeah, just not out of friendliness or, just.
Yeah, if it's my friend already,
right.
Great. But if it's a stranger, it's like, oh, it's a little weird.
It's like, what do you want from me? Sometimes I think about that when, I would think that sometimes when people talk to me. I do enjoy when random people on the street talk to me. I think it's good to have a culture where people just feel comfortable talking to each other. You can be neighborly and everything, but I do see people that are always a little suspicious. There are people that are suspicious that are like, why are just random people talking to me? But it is sad that that's kind of the state of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think your family, the way they raised you, feel like that helped you adapt to like strangers talking to you? Or do you think it didn't help?
I think it depends. Like, you learn your earliest communication style from your parents, I feel like, right? I feel like there are things I learned to do and not to do from how my parents communicated. And I think that's just how it is.
What about dealing with like let's say strangers talking to you, or strangers visiting your house, or in a social setting where you're not going to the church with all the Filipino familiar faces around. You're going to somewhere else with your parents where there are a lot of strangers in social settings. Do you think your parents helped you navigate that situation? Or do you think it's a fresh breath of fresh air in Austin or in Boston you lived where like, oh, this is fresh? Like,
I don't know if it's a
talking to me.
Parent thing though. I feel like it just depends where you are and like how people are too. That kind of affects how you are when you grow up. And I think part of it is personality too. I think there are multiple facets to it. Like, as a child, I was definitely more shy. So just in general, I wouldn't really talk to people very much. Or I would feel worried that they would think weirdly of me. So I think that's a personal thing. I also feel like people are more insular in Seattle. They kind of keep to themselves a little bit more, and they're more reserved. So I think that also affects whether or not you will be just neighborly with people in general. I think it's shifting in Seattle because there's so many people moving from California or the East Coast, or coming from Texas going to Seattle too. So I think that culture is changing. But I think it just really depends like how you grow up and what your personality is, and then how you interact with people. I feel like as I get older, I'm more interested in just learning about other people. So I just like to ask questions now when I meet people and just get to know them. And I feel like that's a good way to interact with other people. Because I always feel like meeting someone new is a new opportunity to learn something new. And I think that's a really positive way to look at it. Although I think part of this question though is how our relationship as a multicultural couple affects how we deal with people, I think, in Austin, or how we interact with people in Austin. I think one thing is because you're not Filipino and I'm not Japanese Korean. I think from the beginning, because you're in a multicultural relationship, you already have to be understanding of different things that you don't expect because your culture is already different.
Right.
And especially because you're not American. So you're going to do things that I don't expect because you're not American. Right. So I think we already had that baseline of like having to be understanding and like learn how we do things, that I feel like moving to a new place with different people is not that much of a change. Like, I'm already used to accommodating for different cultures and ways of thinking and things like that. So, and I've always found that to be interesting.
Yeah, I think that's true. Even when I think about my mom being Korean and my dad being Japanese, I've seen the cultural difference that they gone through. Being married, right? Yeah. And that's a rare thing to have happen back in the time where there's more conflict between the two countries. And younger generation don't really care probably about that past, but it's still fresh in their mind of what happened in World War II. situation. And yeah, that probably did prepare me. And then I also had to migrate to US when I was 13. That was another cultural shock. So it probably did help me adapt to a different culture. Like I feel like I could go into maybe any state in US and maybe I can be fine. Yeah, like I'm gonna be, or we're gonna be maybe the token agents.
Maybe we might stand out.
Yeah, stand out.
Yeah,
right? And that was maybe a little bit more fresh experience in Austin because I felt like I didn't stand out as much in Seattle, especially late years. But I'm feeling that again in Austin, where sometimes we are the token agents.
We're the only Asians when we go to some places, especially in the area that we live in.
Yeah, Dripping Springs area. So yeah, let's move on to the next question. Between Seattle's rain and Austin's heat, which do we think is harder to live and why? Well, I think...
Well, in Seattle, it was always cold.
Yeah. And
so it's extremely hot here in Austin right now, but I kind of like it because I am not cold anymore when I go outside at 9 p.m. at night or 10 p.m. So yes, it is very hot, but I don't know. I guess maybe I was always a tropical girl, I guess, in some way. The heat is very welcome.
Yeah, I think I'm also more familiar with the weather in Austin growing up in Japan, because during summer it gets really hot and you get really sweaty, and with
it's humid.
Humidity, right. And we've been to Japan during summer, and yeah, it's kind of like that. And we also went to Japan during winter where it gets really cold, and that's also very similar in Austin, where people might think Texas is just hot, but like no, it does dip down really cold to the point of the trees getting frozen.
Yeah, we live in central Texas, so we get Midwest weather, which is very extreme and mercurial. So we get it's 100. It's been a streak at least of a month, I think, of 100-degree weather.
Yeah.
But in the winter, it got down to 19 degrees, I think, in February when we had that snowstorm. So the weather is very moody, and it's extremely moody.
Yeah, and I think during like April, May season, like suddenly thunderstorm would come.
Yeah, there was a lot.
And then it passed by. And that's rare, because in Seattle, when it happens, it just happens all day. And it will just stay there as a thunderstorm. And you don't think like in an hour you can just go out because it's going to be gone,
you mean the rain? The rain is very persistent in Seattle. Yeah. Like if it rains, it'll pretty much rain the entire day. So you can just expect to either wear a raincoat, or I mean, if you're used to it, you don't wear a raincoat, or you even have an umbrella. I know a lot of Seattleites pride themselves on never using umbrellas. I would like to stay dry personally, but I feel like I have that privilege growing up there that I don't need one.
Except now we have to put a lot of suntan lotions.
Yeah, the other side of it is, I have to put on sunblock every day here now, which you should do anyway, no matter where you live, because, you don't want to get skin cancer. But I think the humidity compared to Asia is not that bad.
Right,
especially the Philippines, which is also very tropical. It's humid there, but here it's not.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
Especially in Austin, it's like a little bit more drier.
Yeah, but if you come from Seattle, it's humid, so that is something that you might have to get used to. But I have to say I prefer Seattle summers. They're definitely much more mild, and it's nice to be outside because it only gets up to maybe like 85 normally there. It is getting hotter these days, but it's so much nicer to be outside during the daytime here. I think it's almost impossible to be outside during the daytime.
And it's rare
July and August.
It's rare to have like apartment or house with the central AC built in.
Yeah, I think that's changing now though, but
I think people are installing it. And in Texas, almost everyone have nice AC. So if you stay inside, you can pass through the summer just fine. And it is a little bit hard to get out. Like even the garage is really hot. And
anywhere where there's when
we park outside, every time we get in a car, we're like, oh, it's hot. And then it takes like 15 minutes before the AC kicks in the car to feel like it's bearable.
Yeah.
But so overall, you still like Austin after going through the middle of the summer right now.
I mean, I think I'll just escape maybe from now on. Go to Seattle, go somewhere where it's cooler. That's probably why a lot of people who live here go on vacation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's an incentive to just go on vacation because it's so hot.
Yeah.
But otherwise, if you're okay with staying inside, it's fine. If you want to go outside, you probably want to live in Seattle during the summer. Yeah.
Okay, the last question. How have our respective cultures influenced our parenting style? Which is a funny question because we don't have a kid yet. So it might be more hypothetically, how do we think the way we grew up would potentially affect how we might raise our kid?
Oh, I see.
Thinking back, I remember different style. I think my mom was more like affectionate and she'll be there and then try to maybe prioritize me on many things. And I kind of have faint memories of it. And my dad would be more like the typical Japanese dad. Like
what's a typical Japanese dad?
Maybe stone and doesn't talk as much. Or maybe that's my memory of it, but he doesn't talk as much. A lot of typical Asian parenting thing of like, oh, they don't approve me or they never say they love me, that kind of thing, right? And he would always look to be, or at least act like he's the man in the house.
Yeah.
And he's the strict one. But when we go on a drive for a long time, like let's say we go on like an hour drive, we would always talk about different things and have more reasoned, logical conversation about a lot of things. Like, what do we think about, this life aspect of like, maybe it's a religion or maybe it's a legal system or maybe it's like a
say the diet, don't you?
So I think I probably end up inheriting both parenting style where I do want to show an affection.
Yeah.
But I might also be the parent who likes to talk out a little bit of logic. Of like, okay, let me teach you something about like, or hear them out.
Yeah.
And have them explain what they think about something. And I probe them with more questions. It was like that with my dad where he doesn't try to give out an answer. He would ask me, why do you think that's the way? Why do you think that's the way?
Yeah.
That was also true when I did something bad.
Yeah.
And then my dad would sit me down for like 2 hours. And then he gives me a chance to give an excuse why I did something bad. And he would try to counter my excuse. And in the end, I was like, I guess I'm in the
you're in the wrong. Yeah. You
And
convinced yourself talking to him.
Yeah. And I don't know if I'll do that for like 2 hours because I don't know if I want to sit down, but it is important to take time when that happens as opposed to like, oh, I'm busy. I'm going to deal with this kid later.
Yeah.
Discipline later. Because when it happens, like my dad would be like, sit down right now.
Yeah.
Then I know it's, oh my God, that's another 2 hours that I don't get to play. Right?
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think you would do? Do you think your parenting style would influence you? Or do you think like, nah, I'm going to be a little bit different?
I mean, I think I'll mostly be more chiller. It'll be I hope to spend more quality time, I think, with my kid. I feel like my parents were in survival mode when I was a kid, especially when I was really young, because like I said, they didn't have a lot of money and they were working really hard. So we could at least have like necessities. And I feel like that came out a lot in parenting too, where it was like they just wanted peace, calm, peace and calm coming home from work. They didn't want to like deal with like a mess or deal with me like kicking and screaming and things like that. So I feel like they did the best with what they had, but that also meant because they were working pretty much all the time, we didn't spend a lot of time together. But we went on a lot of trips, like when my brother and sister were born. It was like older. I mean, we did go on trips together. We had parties, things like that. So as my parents like became like better off, we were able to spend more time together and do things. So I really think it depends too, like where your parents come from. I feel like I did like that we were able to do like vacations as a family, because I know not a lot of families were able to do that. So that was really nice. But I think what I also want to do with my own kid in the future is spend time like going outside and reading and playing and just learning and just doing a lot of different things. And hopefully I will have that privilege to spend that time with them, because I also know, kids grow up really quickly. So that when they're young, it's important to spend that time with them, because when they're older, they'll have their own life and they'll start to do their own things, have their own friends, and that's normal. It's expected, but I think that's also why the time when they're a kid and they're dependent on you, or you spend all your time together, is really important. You don't get that time back again. So I definitely want to do a lot of different things with them while they're young, and then not regret I didn't do those things with them, so I can set them more free when they're older and they can have their own life.
Yeah, and that kind of circles back to maybe the first question of the work-life balance. Yeah. Where it might be good to have the forcing factor, like kid who's going to force you to like
do fun things.
Right? Yeah, that'd be great. Hopefully we'll have like something like that we can look forward to. And hopefully you enjoy this episode of UbeMatcha Podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified whenever we release a new episode. We also have a TikTok account that you can follow for the shorts. And until next time, we'll see you.
Bye.